Thank you, Arun. It's always good to be at Berkeley. It's a little different than it was in 1959, but not that different, I guess, in many respects. What I was hoping to do today, or what Arun asked me to do, is to kind of review what our N&I review was all about, but hopefully leave plenty of time for your questions. So I'm actually going to show you a number of foils that are actually in our report, but and I'm planning on going through those quickly. So the notion is not to get all the details off the foils, but rather to show you that they are in a report that is on the White House website and is available to you there. First of all, how we got involved. As Arun mentioned, PCAST, which is the President's Council of Advisors in Science and Technology, is something that existed in many administrations all the way back to about the Harry Truman time. We established an interest in NNI, or our predecessor organization did, in 1999. It was launched, and then the legislation of late 2003 called for an advisory panel, and the President decided to have PCAST be that advisory panel. And we made our first report as a result of that activity. The legislation, this is outlined in our report, asks us to report to the Congress and to the President in the areas shown here. And that is indeed what we tried to do with this first report. But we focused in 4 specific areas that are outlined here. And at the time of our report, the Congress specifically asked us to focus heavily on the how are we doing from the standpoint of how are we stacking up internationally. So there was a heavy flavor of that in this report, but I'd like to focus in other areas today of the report that didn't get nearly as much attention. But I thought I'd briefly take you through those. From a dollars spent point of view, nano is a big deal. A lot of money is being spent around the world by our research at the federal levels. Japan, Western Europe, and other countries all together are all approximately spending an equal amount of funding on nano. Also, not only is there a lot of public spending, there is also a lot of private spending, some of it at the venture level, some of it at the larger corporate level. Our findings, which were actually this comes from Lux Research, showed that while it's about even on the public level between Asia, Europe, and North America, at the private level, it appears that U.S. companies are engaged in more nano activity than are companies from around the world. But dollars are only a measure of input. And if you know anything about this administration, the President's interested in outcomes. And so we were really pressed to try to find outcomes. And I can't say that we're 100% pleased with what we came up with. Oh yes, by the way, $400 million of the activity comes from states, and I'm going to come back to that in a few moments relative to some of our conclusions. So we try to look for outcomes, and the ones we used in our report are that from the standpoint of scientific publications, about the same number come out of the United States as a percentage of dollars spent. But if you look at high impact journals such as Science or Nature, Physical Review Letters, etc., the United States has almost half of the letters in the nano area coming from our reviewed areas. The other thing we looked at was patents. Now, we used the U.S. Patent Office because we didn't have access to the International Patent Office, but usually international companies patent U.S. as well as U.S. companies patent in foreign offices. And I must admit, this is an area that we're doing some further study, because just take Japan, for example. It is, we don't know why they would be patenting so little when they're spending about the same amount of money as we are, but that happens to be the facts. The other area we looked at, for which we did not develop a slide, was we tried to look at the number of startup companies in the nano field. And the data that we have show that the U.S. is creating far more startups in nano than any other country at this point in time. So our conclusions were that the U.S. is leading, but is clearly being challenged, and nano is a big deal. We felt that the program is on the right track, and that's what I'm going to describe to you. And this is an extremely important conclusion because it's controversial. we said that the federal role in Nano was to fund basic research and to educate and train scientists and engineers. And by saying that, we were specifically saying that people who are worried about funding these new companies, the valley of death and all those kinds of things you hear about, that is not what we recommend as the federal role. In fact, we specifically said that the 40% of the size of the federal budget that's being spent by the states, that states are into economic development, they should promote the economic development activities. That is controversial. Some in the audience might not agree with that, but that is nevertheless a conclusion that we reached. And therefore, from a recommendations point of view, we said that there has to be better federal-state interaction. In fact, we spent some time talking to a number of state economic development agencies relative to that. We also said that if the building of economic benefit from nanotechnology is going to take place, industry has to be very active, and we've got to help make tech transfer as efficient and as effective as possible. I'll be coming back again to touch on that point in just a moment, but let me just hit it here because it's so important in our conclusions. We would really are trying to figure out how to make it most possible for industry and for academia to get access to all of the investments that have been made in the labs and the various centers that Arun made reference to. From a financing point of view, we said, hey, don't do away with the SBIR, STTR kinds of financing programs, but we wouldn't recommend any particular special programs in this area. Fourth and fifth, the role, of course, of responsible development, protecting a healthy environment, public awareness, and trust are critically important. The model that we had in our mind is, let's not let another GMO happen. The GMOs have been a disaster, the differences of opinion. Let's try to take a scientific approach to what's going on here. You're probably aware of the fact that there's a lot of people very worried about nano. I made all the council members read what's his name's book? Pray. Everybody had to read Pray before we finished our report. And we were thinking that about the time of our report, when we first started this, that Pray was going to be a movie at about that time, so I was really somewhat worried about that. Fortunately, it didn't turn into a movie yet. But nevertheless, very important, and when I go through some of this, you'll see the activity we spent. And the point we tried to make there is that there are unknowns. I mean, and in my own personal experience, let me say that I got involved in the semiconductor industry in 1959. Most of you didn't exist in 1959, okay? That was a long time ago. This reminds me so much of the early days of semiconductors. Multidisciplinary. You have the physicists, you have the mechanical engineers, you have the electrical engineers, you have the chemies. And this one's even broader, though, because you got all the biologists and the bio pieces and all the multidisciplinary activities that you have in this field. So I look at it very similarly to that. And we didn't know where all those things were going. One of the first projects I worked on at GE Semiconductor when I was doing my master's work at Syracuse, and by the way, I would have done it at Cal, but only Syracuse and Purdue offered a master's program in semiconductors in 1960. The fact is, we were thinking of chips on arms to help things. A lot of things you hear about today that might be possible with nano, we were thinking about with semiconductors way back then. So we want to focus on that. We've had meetings with EPA individuals, NIOSH individuals. So that's a rough review of the recommendations. Now I'd like to dig into how the program works a little bit. The strategic plan that the NNI, the National Nanotech Initiative, put out starts with a vision statement. It builds to having 4 goals that feed 7 program component areas, what we call them, and involve some 20 different agencies of the federal government. The program component areas, and I'm going to go through these in just a little bit of detail, are very, very important for those of you that are doing business or trying to get grants from the federal government, because this is how the OMB is keeping track of the money, okay? So if you're going for a grant, it better be aimed at one of these 7 program component areas, or you're going to have trouble with your grant. I'm just telling you that, okay? So be aware of that. These are spelled out in the details. This is the plan. Now, what's the vision? I see dollars dropped in. Arun, thank you very much. Arun helped me with these, breaking my slides up, okay? I haven't actually seen all these in this form until right now. Okay. The vision, of course, is a future in which the ability to understand and control matter at the nanoscale leads to a revolution in technology and industry. We want to have economic benefit, we want to have better security, and we want to certainly improve the quality of life of citizens through this activity. That is the vision. The 4 goals are sustain world-class R&D, facilitate tech transfer. I won't read them to you. And as I mentioned, we really felt that the sustaining world-class R&D was critically important, that we had to understand what was going on at the nanoscale. That was our primary concern in this whole activity, but we obviously had to do it in a responsible way. But in the process, as Arun mentioned, nanotechnology, he said, takes mega dollars. I'd say giga dollars, just to have pure balance there, okay? It's expensive stuff. And that is a difference from the early days of the semiconductor business. I like to tell a story that in 1957, when we started National Semiconductor, a world-class foundry cost $1 million. Hard to imagine that when they're $3 billion today, but that's what it cost, because we were using simple lithography tools, of course, cutting our own rubies and doing the things that were done at that time. Nano is starting off on a totally different plane with enormously expensive equipments, and so we have to get best use of that infrastructure, the best possible use, and so we're trying to separate it or build it around the country to the best of our ability. At this point in time, that involves some 20 federal agencies, as I've said, with budget in this area, over 2,500 active research projects, $4 billion to date during the time of this administration, but 30 research centers, 80 partners. Again, you can read that. But broad scale is the key thing. Lots of departments involved, much more multidisciplinary than it was even in those early semiconductor days that I made reference to. Not only those with budgets, but those without budgets are part of what's called the NSET, the Nanoscale Science and Technology Advisory Committee. But as far as budget dollars, here's about how they break up. NSF having the largest piece, the DoD, DOE, and NIH following in about that order. I'm not going to go into all the centers, but there are a lot of them. And they are accessible centers is the key thing I want to say. They are run by, reference was made to the DOE center that's here at Berkeley. But they are run by Defense, by Energy, by NIST, by NIH, by NIOSH, by NSF, by NASA. Lots of different centers depending upon what your focus is. Now, we're now in an area where we're almost built out on centers, about 2/3 of the way built out on centers. The user facilities, the infrastructure network, you see it's around the country. Thank you, Arun. You broke that slide apart. You're amazing. There you go. The computational nanotechnology centers, and lastly the NSRC, the science research centers throughout the country. Almost all of them are located at universities. And if you go up on, ultimately, this is not true today, but we're trying to get it true. If you go up on nano.gov, you'll be able to find how to get to any one center. Right now, you have to go up on NNIN for the infrastructure centers and the different websites, but we're trying to make that super easy for people to get access. Okay, with those facilities, I want to then turn to that last area, namely the program component areas. These are the 7 program component areas that are tracked, like I say, from a budget point of view, and what we have spent quite a bit of time reviewing. The first one would be the fundamental analysis of phenomena and processes. Here you'll see when I show you the final numbers, a lot of bio work is being done, heavily multidisciplinary activities, but this is at the most fundamental level of what's going on with materials. If you plug a carbon atom and connect it this way, what happens? This way, this way, this way. Are any of those ways toxic? And those kinds of things that we have to have some concern about. Nanomaterials. What's different at the nanoscale? As you know, the theoretical definition of nanotechnology is activity between 1 and 100 nanometers, but also has that point about where the performance in that range would not be predictable from the macro scale. And so, for example, in a conversation at the National Academies just a few months ago, we got into a discussion because I take the position that the 65 nanometer node in semiconductors is nano because of the functions of the transistors, the ballistic effects that are going on at that level. Some people don't. And so adding numbers together here as to who's doing the most research dollars is a little difficult on this. But what's really different about materials at this level? And then building those into devices and systems, what's happening at that level, and understanding the impact of these things within devices and systems. As I already made reference to, the enormous importance of instrumentation, and particularly getting at how to make instrumentation most effective, because it is complex instrumentation. You're dealing at a very, very fine level, and even getting a cost out of these is part of that. Manufacturing, how is that going to be done? Are we going to depend on self-alignment kinds of features that helped us so much in the early days of the semiconductor business and that still help us enormously? Or are we going to have to actually build up from in a complex way from the bottom up processes? What's going on there, and a lot of activity in that particular area. And then actually getting, acquiring the instrumentation, and again, like I say, these are all in our report. And then lastly, these societal dimensions. Now, because of the political nature of the fact that, you know, we do have to report to the Congress, I will have to say that because I'm a bit of a techie myself, but a little out of date in many areas, I was interested in seeing how that at the congressional presentation where I made this, described our findings on this, this is the area that got the most attention. And you might expect that. And it's obviously very, very important. I don't want to demean that, but I hope that it doesn't slow us down in making the right benefit-risk assessments for nanotechnology, because I think there's a huge number of positive things that can come out of this. But we are spending a lot of effort in the budget. About 8% of the budget is going into the societal dimensions area. By one measure. By another measure, it's something slightly over 10%. So, as I mentioned, that's how the budgets are done. And as you see, they are divided up into those 7 classes. Again, this is in our report. I won't go through it. You'll see that the NSF does have the largest budget because of the focus on the basic research. And my co-chair at PCAST, for those of you who don't know that structure, is the science advisor to the president, and he meets with OMB when they set the budget for NSF and for these different organizations. So that's what they're shoehorning in. So you see, NSF is very, very big. Of course, DoD and DOE have their own particular programs. We next asked for, and this came out in their report, in the NI report, okay, what's the interface between these 7 now on the x-axis, on the y-axis, and the 4 goals? Who's responsible for what, or what are we looking for in those 4 goals? Again, I don't want to get into the details because I do want to meet my time commitment here. But we try to look at what's primary, and clearly on the societal dimensions, that 4th goal of being a responsible developer is the principal thing, as you see in the lower right-hand corner on that particular slide. And this is detailed in ever greater detail as to which agency is supposed to be responsible for what. Again, if you're interested in that, it is in our report. I'd like now to turn briefly to 2 other things we tried to look at. We tried to get input on, okay, what's industry interested in? And what are the various industries that make up our economy looking to nanotech for? And we found 2 different reports, and I'll show you 2 slides along these lines. You see that as far as the initial involvement in nanotechnology, you see that biotech, diagnosis, delivery procedures, et cetera, are the largest area, according to this report, with chemicals, films, plastics, materials, you might say, being the 2nd largest. But if you scan around the circle, it's hard to name an industry that isn't doing something at the nano level. But those are the 2 big ones as far as immediate impact, according to this particular study that was done by Small Times Media. A different study, which was done by MTech Research, is even more substantial in that area. Namely, people are looking for biomedical life science input and materials. Again, materials. Now, this breakout is slightly different than the other breakout. Their study was slightly different. But again, if you go around the circle, you see that virtually, most industries that touch on the technology fields, at least, and even some that don't, because if you take materials, we're all familiar with the various things that have been done in the textile field, for example. They deal on that, and we're trying to track that and form industry groups out of the NSET so that the NSET can make sure that research that is found is directed into these industries, and we're using industry associations and certainly people like you folks here at ASME, I think, can benefit from that. The second look we took was, one of the things we did early on in the process was establish a technical advisory board. Arun is a member of our technical advisory group, what we call our TAG. There are 45 folks working in nanotechnology across the country, both in academia and in industry, that are advisors to us. And what we do is we don't meet. We send out emails, and probably in the process of this report, we probably send out 4 or 5 emails asking for guidance of people who are actively involved in nanotechnology research or development. We ask them, okay, what do you think are going to be the first things that come out of nanotechnology? From our advisory board, these were the near-term things. By the way, I want to thank Arun and any other members who are out here that are members of the TAG. I haven't met most of them, but I've certainly benefited from their input. These are the 1 to 5 year things that our technical advisory board said are going to come from nanotechnology. Now, these are folks active in the field. We didn't, steer them one way or another. We just said, what do you expect to happen? And it's kind of consistent with what you saw that industry was working on. I mean, you see a lot of similar things: nanocomposites, membranes, catalysts. We have an example of a catalyst thing that's applicable to automobiles, chemical, biological sensors, etc. And the medical field comes out of here. The one that you wouldn't guess would come out of here, which I think is very, very important for another study we're doing at PCAST, is this long-lasting rechargeable batteries was looked at as an opportunity. In the 5 to 10 year range, here's what we received back. Again, medical playing a very major role, but high efficiency, cost-effective solar cells, fuel cells, energy-related things in the 5 to 10 year range, which I also thought was very, very interesting and of course, critically important. I should say, opening a parenthesis, PCAST is kicking off a major report in alternate energy as a follow-up to a report we did 3 years ago in alternate energy use. We're kicking that off in Washington next Tuesday. And we're using as a base 2 reports, one a report that was put out in 1997 by the previous PCAST that made predictions for 2005, and we're going to look at those and then grow on those. And we're specifically looking at all of the new innovation industries and what they're doing in things that are a little different, like in solar cells. You're probably familiar with SIG's solar cells having a very small piece as opposed to the photovoltaics. What's happening there? What's happening in fuel cells? What's happening with biomass? And it's encouraging us to see this overlap of the studies. Lastly, in the 20-plus year time frame, this is what our advisory board told us. Now, I had the great pleasure in my early days in Silicon Valley of working with Gordon Moore. And all of you know Gordon from Moore's Law, et cetera, et cetera. Wonderful human being. As a matter of fact, I was in Gordon's office the day that somebody stuck their head in the door and said that President Kennedy had been shot. So it goes back a long time, our relationship. And Gordon is neat for saying that most things that talk about 20 and more years out are always wrong. They always happen much sooner than you expect. So I kind of look at this list for the surprises. And as a matter of fact, the venture capital in me says, this is, I think, where I'm going to invest. Because here's where the really interesting opportunities might, in fact, be. But this is, I show this because of the view of people in the field. And if these are not consistent, and we intend to pulsar tag on this about every year. We are to report every 2 years by legislation. Okay, to wrap up, so we can get to some Q&A, I believe that the NNI has made a lot of accomplishments, and I think they've used their money quite well in building the various centers. Foundational knowledge is coming together. I've mentioned some of these points. I think the infrastructure being built with over 35 research centers in important activity. We're really looking at these societal implications, like I said, to make sure that we're on top of that. Educational programs, and then public outreach. And again, we're really hoping, and one of our key recommendations was to continue to grow nano.gov. So it's almost a window into other sites, so that wherever you want to go, if you don't know the specific, like the NNIN, that you'll be able to get there with a single web address, nano.gov, to show that. And we really like the involvement of industry and academia to utilize these facilities, because after all, you paid for them. and therefore we would like their use. I think with that I will close and open to questions.
Yes, sir. No, Alex.
Hi, my name is Alex Settle. I direct one of the NSF NSEC.
I've heard your name. Nice to meet you.
The question that's important to me and the many investigators in that center is about the technology transfer, which you mentioned as one of the directives of NNI. And one fear I have is that with new research going on in new facilities, especially here at Berkeley, these technology transfer offices which exist and have existed for some time are being overwhelmed. And so how do those offices get more money to expand and to take advantage of the new developments in nanoscience and nanotechnology to have spin-off companies and
Yep.
to really commercialialize that?
Yep.
Because right now they're swamped and there doesn't seem to be any money to help them expand.
Yeah, this is a very good question. It's something we've talked about, and I don't have a good answer. But let me give you a philosophical answer, okay? The hope is that because of Bayh-Dole, the hope is that in time, and it hasn't happened yet at a lot of centers, even though some it has started to happen, there will be enough feedback of funds coming in from the arrangements that are made in the licensing of that technology that will help support that. What the government, what the political arm is reluctant to do is to, for example, fund all patent applications. And those are expensive. Now, why would they be reluctant to do that? Well, I used to run companies, and you have to, patents are expensive to make. You have to make a judgment, a value judgment, as to what's the value of this, so that you just don't spend an excessive amount of money. If the government paid for everything, you'd have that value judgment would be missing from the equation. Now, the same is true of these offices. But we are concerned. We're also concerned about, for example, the quality of patents. We are talking to the PTO about this. As you may know, some in Congress would like the PTO to be a profit center. We'd like it to use all of its incoming funds to, in fact, increase its staff so it can do that. The two are interrelated things, frankly, in my mind. And I don't think we've gotten to a bottom line. If you want to give me, if you wouldn't mind, emailing me some examples of this swampedness, I'd like to have it, because you're pointing to a problem. We're aware of the problem, but I'd like more anecdotal data. Sorry, I don't have a better answer.
I'd be happy to send you the
Great, thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Bo Varga. I'm involved in the commercialization side, and I'm wondering if there's been any thought to tax incentives, especially at the startup early stage. England, for example, gives quite significant incentives for angel investors in startup companies in nano and bio and so forth.
I'm not aware of any tax incentives from an investor point of view. We looked at tax incentives from a corporate point of view, and most startups don't pay taxes for so long it doesn't mean anything, so it was a useless thing to do. But frankly, what we're trying to do is just get the tech transfer, the point that Alex is making being the key, so that people are at least encouraged with the research available to them and make that the basis. But there's no other than the R&D tax credits kinds of things that go to companies. We have not recommended anything in that particular area. Arun, why don't you do the thing here? Yes.
Yes, my name is Ted Jagustin. I'm from a startup company called Cotherm. And on your 20-year list of things to come, I believe you're right that you're wrong.
Yeah, right.
And
not me, the tag. It's Arun's fault.
And you said the last on your list was conversion of energy from the environment. Could you elaborate on what you meant by that?
Well, again, that list came from the tag, and as I recall, what that was talking about is there's a lot of talk about the efficiency of better solar cells, better biomass conversion, better wind, but mostly solar in the nano area, mostly solar and biomass, and I don't remember all of the details in that particular one, but it had to do with that. For example, if you take an SOFC, a solid oxide fuel cell, as you all know, one of the big detriments of an SOFC today is that the operating temperatures are in the 700 to 800 degrees C. There are people who believe that using nano composites, you can get that down dramatically. Very dramatically, maybe down to 200, 180, 200, 250, somewhere in that ballpark. Well, that would be an enormous benefit in the building of an SOFC if the thing didn't have to operate at 800 degrees C for all kinds of reasons that I think you can think in terms of. So I think that's what's being talked about here.
My name is Jeff Boker, the Deputy Director at the Molecular Foundry. First, I just want to make a quick comment about your anecdote about Gordon Moore. Everybody's predictions for 20 years are wrong except for his.
That's a good point.
Makes him qualified, I think. But what I wanted to ask about was this. In building these major facilities, we have a lot of research going on in a variety of places on environmental impact of nanomaterials. But we're building facilities and we're starting to see at the various facilities and even in industry the actual manufacture of significant quantities of material. And what troubles some of us is that we have very little guidance and help from federal government agencies in trying to make sure that we do this in a way that doesn't become threatening or scary to the public who are reading Prey and are about to watch that movie. Yeah. And so one particularly standout thing is the incredibly small amount of NNI money at EPA. And I wonder if that was anything that took the notice of your committee, and what comment you have about that?
Actually, it is, and that's why that's a key recommendation we made. Now, it turns out that if you go back and dig into the monies that even NSF's spending, there is quite a bit of money that is listed under NSF that is in the societal dimensions and heavily in that particular area. So it turns out that there's primary activities for societal dimensions not only in EPA or NIOSH, but in other areas. So that's where we come up with the 8 to 11%, like I say, in that particular area. Now, the second thing that we said that I did not comment on is that, and it leads exactly to what you're talking about. We came to the conclusion that the public doesn't have as much concern here as probably the manufacturers of this stuff, people building it, in the process of building it. Certainly if you go back to the semiconductor days when we were early on using arsine gases and didn't exactly know what was going on, that's what was of concern. And so where are those equivalences? And so, as a matter of fact, I have a meeting this coming Monday in Washington with a major chemical manufacturer who has done a lot of work in this area, and we're going to try to get industry to help us also, because they're actually working with this as well, and so some of those rules. The second thing we said, which I didn't also comment on, I've now had 2 meetings in Europe and hope to have meetings in Asia on their activities the safety issues. We think that the safety and environmental quality things are ideal candidates for international cooperation. And they're very, very open to that because, frankly, the scientists in Europe didn't like what happened to GMOs either. So we're like I said, this last April had a very interesting meeting with EU bodies. They're most interested in cooperating. We had the EU's equivalent of PCAST called EURAB at our meeting. Now it's a year ago. This coming month will be a year ago, last October. So we're trying to also get international cooperation because people are going to find things around the world, and we think they're mostly going to find them as these things start being built. And so we're spending money, but we're also trying to build cooperation, and we're right now, like I said, we're focusing on the period of time while in the manufacturing cycle, whether that manufacturing being micro manufacturing in a university environment or macro manufacturing in a larger scale still. But the dollars are in a number of these pots, and that's why the NSET is so important, the Nanoscale Science and Engineering Technology Council. I hope that addresses your question.
Steve Gershik. Yeah, Steve Gershik, University of Minnesota. Just a brief point of information on this topic. In 2.5 weeks, October 3rd through 5th, at University of Minnesota, there's going to be an international symposium on nanotechnology, occupational health and safety, or some title like that, bringing together people from OSHA, EPA, different labs studying health effects and so forth. If you're interested in it, I can help direct you to the website, or you can easily Google it.
Thanks very much. And as a matter of fact, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love the proceedings of that, because I did hear about that conference.
Okay,
and can't be
make
there.
sure to do that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mark Menon. I've been active in trying to commercialize nanotechnologies for a few years. I want to go back to Alex's question because you mentioned Bayh-Dole as a source of potential revenue to fund those kinds of activities that would take technologies that are coming out of the university and get them into the marketplace. Yeah. And frankly, the data on that I'm familiar with is pretty abysmal. I can think of one university that gets about $1 billion in federal grants a year, and I understand that their licensing revenue is literally in the single-digit thousands. Mm-hmm. So that's really not, in the near future, going to be something that creates the kind of infrastructure that you need. And frankly, the gulf between the technology that's coming out of the universities on the one hand and what would be recognizable to somebody in industry or as a venture capitalist as a useful commercial product, that gulf is enormous, and there is no infrastructure to try and translate from the licensing office at UC Berkeley or anywhere else to industry. So it's incredibly hit or miss. And the fear, of course, is that NNI is very well publicized. There's billions and billions of dollars that are going into nanotechnology. People are going to start asking, okay, so where's my nano? And where is it
sure.
that I can?
Yeah. Well, just to make I understand the comment. About $100 million, just north of $100 million of Bayh-Dole revenues goes to universities every year, just so you have a hard number. And that's obviously spread around a lot of universities, but that's about the number. And it is true that 3 biotech patents are a huge part of it, okay? And the other revenues are relatively small, but they are on a very sharp up curve. But always open to ideas on how we fix that. Yes.
My question is about the broad value of death in nanotech. You alluded to it, and it's also a follow-on to the previous question. Yeah. So you alluded that the state governments might get involved in that, not the federal government. Could you elucidate on that a little bit?
Well, that was our suggestion because, again, economic development, as you might know, is a politically sensitive issue in Washington, and every state, and we have actually a report coming out that will actually list the economic development offices in every state in the country. Every state has an office. They're spending $400 million, 40% of what the federal government is doing, and we're saying through federal and state cooperation, let's put some of that burden over there so that we get the research right. So, in asking the question, it's like, in the early days of semiconductors, everybody wanted to automate processes, and the best example was probably Philco. Remember Philco? They automated the microalloy diffuse transistor, and then planar happened. Okay, big mistake. They ended up going out of business. We believe, and again, you can agree with it or not, but the research is the most important thing right now. And so you have limited dollars. What are you going to spend your money on? And I hear the folks who say, wait a minute, if you do all the research and everybody else picks up all the economic benefits, you've made a mistake. I don't disagree with that, but we do have a pretty active venture capital industry in our country, and it usually is willing to take high risks. We certainly do at our firm, and so we're saying state and private sources of funding are the right way to tackle this. You only have so much, and how do you divide the pie? That's where we come out, and it's not a happy situation in some people's minds, but that's the decision we've made, or that's the recommendation we've made. By the way, the administration is not obligated to take our recommendations. I've learned that in the last 4 years.
Yeah, sure.
Please. Hi, my name is Adriana Vela, and I founded a networking and... Hi, Adriana Vela, founder of NanoBioNexus, which is a educational and networking forum. I've seen some of your slides in the past, so it was great to have those reaffirmed. But one of your recommendations, the PCAST and NNAP recommendations, is to build awareness and trust, given, of course, issues that we've seen in the past with GMOs and so forth. Also, number 7 of your program component areas, societal dimensions, education seem to be one of the key things, key to your goal number 4.
Yeah.
So I am really confused as to why there is no support for an organization like mine. We launched we launched last year, and it made inquiries even directly to Mr. Rocco, and he said, no, there's no such thing, no money's appropriated, no way to support your organization. So we're kind of like on our own. Can you elaborate, please?
I'd like to refer that back to Mike. I'm not aware of federal support specifically for organizations of that structure. I really don't know about that, okay? So I shouldn't even comment. Certainly within the agencies, they all have an educational component of something that they're supposed to roll out what they're doing for this, heavily because of this fear thing. And let me just elaborate on that for just one further moment. I mean, for those of you in the audience, because I understand a number of are in the bio side, the big area is human enhancement that scares people. And if you've got any words of wisdom on how we define human enhancement and decide when it's human enhancement and when it is curing problems, I'm open, okay, because this is a big problem. I mean, I don't know if how many of you read the book that's just come out. I can't remember the name of it. It's something biology, liberation, somewhere that starts with the story of a 150-year-old great-great-great-great-great-grandmother playing soccer with her great-great-great-great-grandchildren or something like that. And the interesting thing is it takes place in 2100. Do the math. That person's living today, okay? And you say, okay, now, is that good? Is that not good? And people are worried about that kind of stuff, and it could really get interesting politically, and we're trying to stay abreast of that. But if you have ideas in that area, I mean, I'd prefer not to wear these glasses. What do we do about that? Should I see as well at my 68 years as I did when I was 20? Yeah, well, I think so, but I don't. And what is enhancement? What is not enhancement? And these are interesting questions that when you're using federal dollars, when you're using state dollars, you got to address, and there are folks they're willing to help you. Is that it? One more?
My name is...
I'll go as long as you want to go, by the way, but yeah.
From the University of Texas at Dallas. I'd just like to make a comment on health issues of nanotechnology. I think there are many issues that need to be experimentally investigated. but also I think there's a major problem in the data that's being provided to the scientific public and the general public in, for example, areas of like carbon nanotubes. There's a disconnect between the toxicologist and the material scientist. Toxicologists with material scientists, major institutions are writing very influential papers on the toxicological effects of carbon nanotubes. When they fail to provide any analytical information about those nanotubes, the contaminants, in which in the particular samples investigated, you have 40% metal nanoparticles. And it's very well known that metal nanoparticles cause cells to die. But if people, the public, reads papers that say this is the toxicological effect of the nanotubes. In other words, I ask everyone in this audience to be who's interested in technological advance, not only in the nanotube area. When you see papers presented talking about the toxicological effect of any nanomaterial, ask about the characterization details. There's just I don't know of any reports that provide useful toxicological data on nanotubes, because I don't know any that avoid this problem. And I do know many reports, including work that we've done with collaborators at UT Southwestern, where you see that functioning nerve cells just love to grow on carbon nanotube yarns. And so I ask for you all to help clean up the literature. Don't dirt it up yourself, and help.
Well, I appreciate the comment. We did spend an entire day on subjects very akin to what you're talking about, and it is true. I mean that some of the reports have fed research animals amounts of things that would not be practical. I mean, you wouldn't use it practically. Having said that, we don't know what the results of some of these things are. We just don't know, and therefore I think care is important. Like I say, I come out of the very early days of the semiconductor business, and we did some things that we probably shouldn't have done in hindsight. So the more we know about it, the earlier I think we're better off, and furthermore, if we can get an international cooperation going, and I'm very pleased about conferences such as has been pointed out here, that will help in this area. Because the way I explain this up on the Hill, by the way, and my chem professor here, I think he's no longer here, but he would cringe. They were trying to explain, well, isn't carbon, aren't they? I said, it's a little like Tinker Toys. Remember Tinker Toys? When it depends on which hole you put something in that judges the characteristics. And they kind of, hey, I understand that. I remember Tinker Toys. But when you're dealing at matter at these levels, it's the characteristics of that matter obviously change dramatically depending upon how the Tinker Toys were put together at that level, and there's no way you're going to know the end of the nth power of combinations, and there's probably one or two that are bad. Let's not focus on those. Let's avoid them, but at least know about them, so the science again comes to the fore.
One last question.
Yeah, I'm Terry Hendricks from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and you mentioned $1 billion budget was the fiscal 06 request. How quickly do you think that kind of budget may grow over the years? Any projections?
I don't have a peak at what the 07. The 07 is coming together, as you might imagine, right now. And I just don't have a peak. It's changing in its shift between the agencies. I know quite a bit, but I frankly don't have an answer. It grew rather rapidly in the last 4 or 5 years. I don't see it growing at that rate, because it would be very, very large by the end of the next 3 or 4 years out if it did that. So I suspect there's clearly a knee in the curve, as there is 06 to 05, by the way. But I apologize, I don't know. Thank you very much.